15th Supplementary Proclamation on September 22nd, 2020, suspending Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 92, Public Agency Meetings and Records to the extent necessary to enable boards as defined in Section 92-2 to conduct meetings without any board members or members of the public physically present in the same location, among other things. The Board of Education will be holding virtual meetings until further notice. The public can still call in or log on to listen to board meetings live. The live broadcast is audio only for both board members and the public. Video of the board members and any presenters will not be broadcast. An image of the agenda will be shared on the screen. This is to reduce the amount of bandwidth that this meeting takes up and to preserve the quality of the audio. Board members, a couple of reminders. Be sure to raise your hands in Webex to participate in the discussion and to wait to be called on before speaking. After you are finished speaking, please remember to take your hands down. Mute yourselves when you are not speaking and unmute yourself when you are called on. Please state your title and the name when you participate so members of the public know which board member is speaking. If you lose your connection or experience any technical difficulties during the meeting, contact the board staff right away. We also have replacing Captain Yatko. Today is Colonel Selleck, so please welcome to you and thank you for being here to represent our military community. With that, I will call the meeting to order at 1:32 p.m. The first item on our agenda is public testimony. Members of the public who signed up to testify, you must be logged on to Webex using the same name you used to sign up for testimony. Board and staff will call on you in the order in which you signed up to present oral testimony. Board staff will unmute your mic. Please test your speakers and microphones before your name is called to ensure that they are working. Instructions on how to do so are on the board's website. If you're not audible because of technical issues, you will be muted and the next testifier will be called on. We will have a 2-minute limit for our testifiers. We have 26 people signed up to testify. State your name, your organization, and the agenda item you are testifying on. A chime will sound when you have 30 seconds left, and a second chime when your testimony time expires. You will be automatically muted once your allotted time expires. All right, we will have our staff call on our testifiers.
Mahalo, Chair Payne. Julie Reese Oda, followed by Jason Billings, Christian Salvador, Benjamin Scott. Julie Reese Oda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Mahalo, Julie, I can hear you as well. Your 2-minute testimony time begins now.
My name is Julie Reyes Oda, and I'm a math teacher at Nanakuli High, an intermediate school on the island of Oahu, and I'm speaking about telework. You can listen to the board meetings, the Senate COVID hearings, and anything that there's a representative for the department that's asked about telework. And the standard response is that telework is a management right and is granted on a case-by-case basis by the principals, and there's no policy on denying telework from the superintendent's office. But based on all the testimony of the board, orally and in writing, and on information gleaned from the HSTA's submissions in support of telework, the department has been denying loads of telework requests, both formally and informally. Now, you can listen to the department's comments and compare it to the testimony submissions, but what I want you to see is what the department did to thwart telework for teachers in writing and in their own guidelines. On the May 24th telework guidelines, it says that telework is not suitable for employees whose positions require that the employee have face-to-face contact with supervisor, coworkers, subordinates, clients, or the general public. On July 24th, they changed the guidelines and inserted the word students to describe unsuitable characteristics for telework, which is 5 days before teachers reported for duty. Those same May guidelines state that the employee's request for telework not be unreasonably denied. On September 2nd, they changed the line from shall not be unreasonably denied to reasonably evaluated. Those same May guidelines state that upon request by the employee, the denial and the reason for denial shall be in writing. On September 2nd, the department changed it to the reason for denial of a telework request may be provided to the employee. They didn't even want the employee to know why telework request was denied, nor will they be able to get it in writing. Lastly, May 24th telework guidelines say appeals shall be subject to the respective bargaining unit's grievance procedure. The department updated the guidelines on September 2nd to delete that entire line. The intention, as inferred by the guideline changes and time of the changes, show that the DOE did not want telework granted for teachers, and that the DOE didn't want to answer for the telework denials. So I want you to understand that the department needs more guidance.
Jason Billings, followed by Christian Salvador, Benjamin Scott, and Susan Piccola Davis. Jason Billings, can you hear me? Jason, can you hear me? Final call for Jason Billings. Christian Salvador, can you hear me? Christian? Final call for Christian Salvador. Benjamin Scott, can you hear me? Benjamin? Final call for Benjamin Scott. Susan Piccola Davis, followed by Jaden Natividad, Osa Tui, Corey Rosenlee. Susan Piccola Davis, can you hear me? Susan? Final call for Susan Piccola Davis. Jaden Natividad. Jaden, can you hear me? Jaden? Final call for Jaden Natividad. Osa Tui, followed by Corey Rosenlee, Andrea Eshelman, Paula, Paul Daughtery. Osa Tui, Vice President, HSTA. Can you hear me?
Aloha, Gina.
Aloha, Tui. I can hear you. Your testimony time begins now.
Aloha, Chair Payne and members of the Board of Education, Osatui, McKinley High School, and HSTA Vice President. On behalf of the Hawaii State Teachers Association, I want to commend the board for giving of your time once again to have this special meeting so that serious concerns throughout the system can be addressed. You're also to be commended for holding the department accountable for their inaction or direct contradictions of the policy guidance you have laid out throughout this pandemic. One of those items is about telework. You've heard and read for this meeting and for your last meeting, passionate testimony about how inconsistently the option to telework has been administered throughout the state. Critically, this has caused undue burden and stress on employees and further eroded their morale during this pandemic. Just reading testimony provided by several complex area superintendents continues to demonstrate an unwillingness and an inflexibility towards complying with your directives. Employees in those complex areas have read and digested in disbelief and diabetic shock all of the sugarcoating and confirmation bias contained within their submissions. Their testimony also speaks to teleworking as being a management right and asks you not to take away that right. Well, as a board, it is your right and duty to determine policy and guidance to those managers. It's time you exercise your right as such to bring about much needed relief and alignment of practice. Teachers and other certificated personnel are professionals and should be treated as such. We appreciate your acknowledgement of that fact by holding this special meeting and hope that you will pass this clear and reasonable action item as presented by Chairperson Payne. Mahalo.
Corey Rosenlee, followed by Andrea Esselman, Paul Daugherty, Keoki Fraser. Corey, can you hear me?
Hi, Gina. Can you hear me?
Mahalo. Yes, Corey. Your testimony time begins now.
Good afternoon, Chair Payne and board members. I'm Corey Rosenlee, HSTA President. HSTA supports and appreciates the board taking action on metrics for school reopening and telework. HSTA also supports making the default mode distance learning and that the DOE must use distance learning until certain criteria are met, including incorporating Board of Education action items and clarification of DOE metrics with the CDC metrics. HSTA is urging the Board of Education to take action to move schools to distance learning for second quarter. The current reality of leaving the decision to the complex area superintendents is chaotic and appears capricious. Because right now on the same island and in neighboring complex areas, we have totally different standards, which makes no sense from a public health standard. There are only 3 questions this board needs to consider before reopening schools. Number 1, will reopening schools for in-person learning lead to higher cases at schools and in the community? William Hanage, an infectious disease researcher at Harvard, said, when and where schools reopen and students return to classrooms, opportunities for transmission will escalate. The result, a rise in cases among young learners, is predictable. So far in the US, 51 children have died of COVID and over 3,000 children have been hospitalized. If you include teachers and staff, there have been 122 deaths in the US since July. 2, when we have a surge in cases, will schools have to go back to distance learning? The answer is yes. 3, what is better for our teachers and students? To maintain consistency with distance learning or to keep vacillating between hybrid and distance learning? That answer should be obvious. Please, board, vote for the safety of our keiki and our teachers. Thank you.
Andrea Eshelman, followed by Paul Daugherty, Keoki Fraser, Sherry Nakamura. Andrea, can you hear me? Andrea? Final call for Andrea. Paul Daugherty, HSTA. Paul, can you hear me? Paul?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Paul, I can hear you. Mahalo. Your testimony time begins now.
Thank you. I'm Paul Daugherty. I'm chair of HSTA's negotiations committee and a math teacher at Conewana High School on the Big Island. I will continue HSTA's testimony talking about the difference between the Department of Health and the CDC metrics. Looking in HSTA's slide number 4, the State Department of Health did not include other metrics from the CDC that are important to determine if schools can reopen. Those metrics the state left out include hospital inpatient beds and intensive care hospital beds that are occupied. They also left out another key metric, the percentage change in new cases. On the day the state announced these new school metrics in the middle of last month, Hawaii had 10.4 cases per 100,000, which would have put Oahu at the highest level and would have required distance learning for all students under CDC metrics. Why did the health department fail to include these other crucial metrics that other states and school districts are using? It appears that the state was going for the bare minimum so they could justify reopening schools in spite of the continued dangers from community spread. The last slide of our testimony, slide number 5, shows how the DOH metrics and the CDC metrics would impact each island with radical differences. The CDC metrics would put Molokai and Hawaii in the second highest category, which the Department of Health model would not. As a note, even though Lanai is in the lowest category, the small community will not be able to get enough substitutes if teachers took sick or took leave. Molokai did open some schools for face-to-face and since has seen an increase in cases and now in the second highest category using CDC numbers. HSTA does not know how Department of Health reached their numbers, why they are different from the CDC, and why the DOH did not include those other metrics from the CDC. Before students are allowed back into the classrooms,
Keoki Fraser, followed by Sherry Nakamura, Caroline Batuli, Sarah Guai. Keoki, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Mahalo, Keoki, we can hear you as well. Your testimony time begins now.
Hi, Keoki Frazier, principal at Aikai Elementary School in Kailua. Also proud Waimanalo resident and homestead of Waimanalo and the community there. Happy to share some thoughts today. I feel like the clarity that the board is seeking as far as metrics and guidance for reopening schools is super important. I think what's happening, my personal opinion as a community member and also as a principal at elementary school, is we're being torn at the school level between the love we have for our children and the love their teachers have for helping them as best they can. I don't think no teacher or no staff member at any school will say that education from distance is better than education face to face. And so there's that part of us that is definitely torn, and there's the part of us where also we want to be safe and making sure things are clear and making sure the department and the DOE and the Department of Health is working together to best support a safe environment for all involved is what we're shooting for, because we're trying to educate and help our kids. And while we're safer, while the kids aren't here at school from the virus, I'm concerned about what we're not seeing and what we don't know so well in terms of the social emotional impacts of kids. And as a Waimanalo resident, I'm concerned about if our students aren't on track and they aren't able to read, and their education is significantly altered from not being able to learn as best as they can at school, face to face. I worry about where they'll be in 5 years. I worry about what the long-term effects of this situation is. So I would appreciate the clarity. I'm advocating for it to be clear. And my opinion, at our school level, we have to tighten some things up. We have to improve a few systems. I feel like we're ready. I feel like we have the support otherwise to be successful with the strategies. I'm just concerned about the Department of Health being able to support us in the event of a positive case, and I'm worried that.
Sherry Nakamura, followed by Caroline Batuli, Sarah Guai, Amy Peruso, Debbie Anderson. Sherry, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, nice and clear, Sherry. Mahalo. Your testimony time begins now.
Aloha, Chair Payne and members of the board. My name is Sherry Nakamura, Director of He'e Coalition. I am commenting today on action item 3C. We want to reiterate our written testimony stating that we support the proposed positions and directives and applaud the board for trying to provide clarity and transparency for the reopening of schools. We think that these state-level requirements and guidance should help the schools with their reopening plans. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Caroline Batuli, followed by Sarah Guai, Amy Peruso, Debbie Anderson. Caroline, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Caroline, loud and clear. Mahalo. Your testimony time begins now.
Thank you. My name is Carlene Batul, and I'm a parent of 3 girls who attend Daniel K. Inouye Elementary School in Schofield Barracks. The DOE's inability to make decisions, refusal to enforce guidelines, and overall abdication of responsibility has created an environment in which parents and teachers are kept in the dark about the progression of the school year, and school administrators are burdened with decisions that should be made at a district level. Hawaii DOE's stance has been that each and every school is different, and thus they cannot apply the same guidelines with regards to reopening schools. In washing their hands clean of any and all responsibility, they have missed the opportunity to develop a core set of metrics that would offer a clear set of steps that districts and complex areas could follow, but have instead created a system in which educational equity and equality is even harder to achieve than in previous years. The elementary school my children attend adopted their own blend of the suggested models, and now we have some classes with 10 children and others with 22. While class size may not affect how children learn in a virtual setting, it seems as if little thought was put into the scenario of what the class sizes would look like once school went back full time. Or is that likelihood something that the DOE has considered a long shot all along, but parents and teachers have not been privy to? What of the teachers who have 22 students to watch after, assess, and educate, while their peers have 10, or have many more, but are facilitating an online learning program rather than virtually teaching? How is the division of labor at all equitable? The DOE has had ample time since March to gather input and develop a plan that ensures safety to their staff and students and establishes a clear set of standards for the progression of education, but they have shirked that responsibility. Hawaii's Unified School District has become anything but. Thank you for your time.
Sarah Guai, followed by Amy Peruso. Sarah, can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Sarah. Mahalo. Your testimony time begins now.
Today, you'll likely be taking action to determine how soon our children will have the opportunity to return to the classroom for direct instruction. I know you've received many, many letters and testimonies hearing how unsafe it is to open up classrooms, and you must be facing a very difficult decision. I'm asking today that you consider ensuring those of us who have researched and believe our children can and must be safely returned to schools have the option to do so immediately. Schools who can demonstrate a plan to return to classrooms meeting safety thresholds should be allowed that opportunity. Parents who feel unsafe returning their children to the classroom can continue to keep their kids out of school. They've had that option to select long-term distance learning at the beginning of the year. They had a choice. Those of us who believe our schools have engaged in adequate planning do not have a choice right now. We are and have been at the whim of unclear decision-making, protocol, and delayed adoption of any safety standards. Every day our children stay out of school is another day further behind in their academics and motivation to engage in their learning. It's important you understand what a day in the life of a distance learner looks like. My first grader receives 1 hour of direct instruction each day since distance learning began in August. That 1 hour it starts at 9 a.m., begins a Pledge of Allegiance, physical education, and a barrage of technical difficulties and challenges. Aside from the quality of the learning, there's a serious issue about his lack of instructional time. This schedule began in August, which means he's received approximately 35 hours to date of the 1,080 instructional hours annually mandated by Hawaii revised statutes. I think we'd all agree that's a problem. I see a different impact in my fourth grader, a student who formerly was in a gifted and talented program, which is no longer available, has always been an eager and engaged learner who thrived. I now read her emails to her friends complaining about how much she hates school, how dumb she is, and how she wishes she never had to return. It's a near daily battle. Recent research shows that this disengagement and negative impact on academic motivation is long-lasting. Our kids' future is at stake.
Amy Peruso, followed by Debbie Anderson, Kainoa Lopez, Christine Barker, Cindy Kelly. Board Chair, Hawaii State House Representative Amy Peruso, District 46, Wahiawa, Whitmore Village, Launani Valley. Representative Peruso, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Mahalo, Representative. Your testimony time begins now.
Thank you. Aloha, Chair Payne and board members. My name is Amy Peruso, and I am testifying on agenda item 3C. I had no intention of testifying orally today because I know your time to deliberate is precious, and I had already submitted written testimony. But over the last few days, I've received multiple phone calls from educators in my district and across the state asking why the concerns I had raised publicly 2 weeks ago with respect to the DOH's failure to adhere to the CDC guidelines received no acknowledgement in the stated purposes for this special meeting. I submitted the contents of the charticle that Ryan Ozawa and I wrote for Hawaii Tech based on research done by teachers who did not wish to be identified for fear of retaliation as testimony a few days ago. So I hope that you have all had a chance to read it. I will just go straight to the punchline. By uncritically adopting the Department of Health metrics, which are not even close to aligning with CDC guidelines, you are putting teachers and students in roughly 10 times the level of danger that other states are. We are the only state with published metrics for returning to learn that are so far off the mark. If you look at the metrics being adopted by Oregon, Arizona, New Hampshire, Vermont, Minnesota, etc., you will find that they're actually aligning their metrics with the CDC guidelines. As a legislator and as a former DOE teacher, I am painfully aware of the deferential attitude we tend to adopt towards those doing work outside our lane. We don't want to seem arrogant or upset others, so we don't ask questions or push back. But sometimes it is our responsibility to ask questions of the departments with whom we are partnering. Look at the math. Ask the Department of Health to defend their metrics. I promise you, they will not be able to, not with any sense of intellectual integrity. So I'm asking you to please work with the Department of Health to develop new metrics. These are unacceptable. Mahalo.
Debbie Anderson, followed by Kainoa Lopez, Christine Barker, Cindy Kelly, Cindy Koo. Debbie, can you hear me?
I am unmuted, Gina.
Yes, Debbie, I can hear you. You sound a bit soft. Can you get a bit closer to your microphone, please?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Mahalo. Your testimony time begins now.
I'm Debbie Anderson, Health and Wellness Coordinator at my middle school. Speaking on item 3C, I did a literature review of toilet-oriented studies. And my question as we reopen gradually is, how do we address restroom health concerns? Because there are sanitation hazards if we make attendance mandatory again for students and employees. The 3 precautionary measures we need are 1, toilet lids, 2, no spraying onto the tissue, and 3, better ventilation. We especially need to protect our HGEA custodians. Bathrooms are moist places and often frequently poorly ventilated. That increases exposure. And after girls reach puberty, then we have feminine hygiene concerns as well. And there is documentation of infectious diseases being transmitted through toilets. The feces are highly concentrated, and so excretions, basically, even after a month after the illness is over, they can still be shedding COVID in the feces. When a flush happens, about 6,000 tiny droplets fly up over 3.5 feet into an air. This is within a minute after you flush and you're traveling toward the wash basin. This plume can go in 6 feet in every direction, about 65 square feet, according to Harvard Medical School, and linger in a single-use toilet for 16 minutes. We have problems in larger areas where you have open top and bottom stalls. And so there are recommendations to try to at least shut off every other urinal. Some of the strategies that have been proposed are flush and step back or flush and rush. But with school toilets being lidless, there's no of this box.
Kainoa Lopez, followed by Christine Barker, Cindy Kelly, Cindy Koo. Kainoa, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Kainoa, yes, I can hear you. There's some background noise going on. Your testimony time, Kainoa, begins now.
Yes. Aloha, DOE. My name is Carlos Lopez from James Campbell High School. In my opinion, I believe you should not reopen schools because you're only not putting the students in danger, but you're putting the students' family. And this is not a great decision because, for instance, sanitization. If somebody is infected and someone else touches where the infected person touches, then they will get infected. And you never know. Maybe you're infected too. Mahalo.
Christine Barker, followed by Cindy Kelly, Cindy Koo, Esther Kane Hailua. Christine, can you hear me? Christine Barker. Final call for Christine Barker. Cindy Kelly. Cindy, can you hear me? Final call for Cindy Kelly. Cindy Koo, followed by Esther Kanehailua, Aaron Bacat. Cindy Koo, can you hear me? Cindy? Cindy? Can you hear me? We have no audio connection with Cindy Koo. We'll be moving on. Esther Kanehailua, Complex Area Superintendent, Hilo Tuwaiakea. Esther, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Esther. Mahalo. Your testimony time begins now.
Aloha Board Chair Payne, Vice Chair Uemura, and board members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in opposition to Board Action Item B, directives regarding telework approval criteria and telework termination restrictions. I don't believe the intent of this action is to imply that schools are not safe enough for staff to work at. Because if we say that, aren't we saying that they aren't safe enough for our children? I have been to all of my schools in my complex multiple times since we started distance learning in March. And I know the thought and care that each school administrator and their staff have put into ensuring safety of all in their school community, particularly our students. If COVID-19 is something we need to learn to live with, it becomes a part of what we need to educate and practice as a school community. Having school administration decide on a case-by-case basis telework places our trust in our school principals who understand their teachers and individual circumstances, like readiness, availability of supports to teachers, connectivity, and the tech needed for distance learning. It ensures responsiveness to troubleshoot quickly, access to resources in the classroom and on campus, and connect students with additional support swiftly, all with the end goal of providing the best for our students, a sense of normalcy, predictability, and consistency in such trying times. More importantly, it builds confidence in our school staff through practice of health and safety protocols, which we should be modeling and teaching our students. Teachers provide an additional lens from the student perspective that they have to admin and custodial staff in preparation for students. It has been a great managerial tool for administrators when teachers are potentially exposed for COVID or awaiting results. My worry is removing this managerial right from school principals will be counterproductive to the efforts that have been put in. Fear is defined as an unpleasant feeling triggered by the perception of danger, real or imagined. We can help mitigate fear when we educate, practice, refine, and improve.
Aaron Bacat, followed by Micah Verdadero, Brooke Nasser, TJ Ainuu. Aaron, can you hear me? Aaron Bacat. Final call for Aaron Bacat. Micah Verdadero. Micah, can you hear me?
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, Micah, I can hear you. Mahalo. Your testimony time begins now.
I believe school, as of right now, is not safe to open because no action is being taken for it to open safely. And to be honest, this meeting right now, if it really mattered, whether or not we're going to open schools or not, then I believe that everyone should speak what they have to say instead of having this stupid 2-minute stuff. That's just what I got to bring out right now. Second is this Hawaiian online class. They can't even spell Queen Liliuokalani's name right. So obviously with that, it shows that these classes are not worth it. So with all that money you're putting into it, could be used to send sanitation supplies and health supplies like hand sanitizer and Clorox wipes. School, if that was to happen, which I believe will not happen, because the DOE and the Board of Education is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, schools should open up to at least classes that need it, like PE, wood shop, classes that you need to physically be there. Because right now in wood shop, I'm not learning the only thing I learned about wood is how to use the tools, but I'm not there learning how to physically know it, even though I already do. There's some students in there that don't. Earlier today, my first period teacher, god damn that, my first period teacher, Miss K, was crying because she believes that you guys aren't doing what you guys could possibly do to open up schools. And if school was to open up, she doesn't feel like she has the ability to tell the parents of the students that might possibly catch the case that they caught COVID. Oh my.
Brooke Nasser, followed by TJ Ainu'u, Kara Flores, Stephen O'Neill. Brooke Nasser, can you hear me? Brooke. Final call for Brooke Nasser. TJ Ainu'u. TJ, can you hear me? Final call for TJ Ainu'u. Kara Flores. Kara, can you hear me? Kara Flores. Final call for Kara Flores. Stephen O'Neill. Stephen, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Stephen, I can. Mahalo. Your testimony time begins now.
My name is Steve O'Neill, and I'm a parent of 3 children in the public schools. I also have experience as a disaster response lead for the UN. I'm testifying on item 3C and fully support your commitment to ensure that science-backed health and safety requirements and clear metrics are met before schools open to in-person learning. Like you, I want the schools to open, and where reasonable metrics are met and the principals and their teaching teams agree, they should do so now. At the same time, we are concerned that the metrics are being manipulated to make high-risk districts seem less risky to support the state's efforts to simultaneously open to tourism. 2 weeks ago, we noticed that the Department of Education metrics were announced within hours of the announcement that the state would also open to tourism. We all live in one community, and obviously they are interlinked. We noticed 2 alarming things. One was that while the DOE seemed to use CDC's school opening framework, they then based Hawaii's metrics on active cases per 10,000 instead of CDD suggested metrics of active cases per 100,000. Clearly, the Hawaiian-based teachers and students should not accept 10 times the risk of students elsewhere. The second was the state was opening tourism with no shortened quarantine and no second test to exit quarantine on day 6 or 7, which is the only scientifically proven way to catch travelers infected on their trip to Hawaii. No science supports a single pre-flight test and then fully dropping quarantine. Tahiti, Alaska, the Bahamas, all have shown that this will fail miserably. Please follow the science when opening your schools and insist the state is the same as they open to tourism. They are interdependent. You must ultimately make science-based decision-making and accept nothing less. Mahalo.
Chair Payne, our final testifier for today is Orasa Manmuenang. Orasa, can you hear me? Orasa? Orasa? Orasa, we're getting a lot of feedback from your microphone, but I can't hear your voice. Orasa? Orasa, can you hear me? Chair Payne, that concludes our testimony for today.
Thank you for that. I apologize that so many people were not able to testify, and we're not clear if it was that they chose to not testify, or if there was a technical problem on some of the computer connections. But we did receive quite a bit of written testimony, which is publicly posted on our website. This time we got more testimony than in the past from people outside of the teacher ranks who are DOE employees. We heard about issues with the clerical staff and the educational assistants. And while we're not addressing other employee groups at this time, I think that they also need to be taken into consideration as we move forward. We heard testimony from the nonprofits that support our public schools. The special education group, SEAC, asked us to be aware of the need for greater mitigation in sanitation efforts and behavioral kinds of safety concerns with some of our special ed students. We need perhaps some different mitigation efforts for service providers who go from school to service students. We heard from some of them. What I want to say before we get started discussing our action items is one of the things that comes through very clearly in all of the testimony, regardless of the position of the testifier, is that there is tremendous confusion about what is expected and what are the criteria for the different stages that we go through as we open our schools. The board is today trying to set some guidelines around that so that it's clear what is expected. We're not trying to take away the empowerment of school principals and complex area superintendents to make decisions on behalf of their vision for what is right for their schools. But it's very evident that there is tremendous inconsistency and a perceived lack of fairness in the telework issue, and there's inconsistency in metrics for reopening beyond the CDC and Hawaii Department of Health guidelines on case numbers, but also on healthy behaviors and supplies and mitigation for cleaning. Many, many problems affecting that, and all of those have to be considered as we open school. I don't believe that teachers are viewing telework as an easy way out of going into the classroom, because it does seem that it's very, very hard for them to accomplish what they want to do for their students through this model. We had a lot of time in March and April and May to do training. Some of that was done, but I think looking back, as we think about our lessons learned, we did not expect schools to not reopen in the fall. And so some of that time was not spent as, looking back, we might have better used it to help our teachers and train them. But that's moving forward now. I think we have to listen to the voice of teachers, the voices of parents, and our principals and our complex area staff. But we have to keep in mind the health and safety as our first priority. So with that, let me just check. I'm getting a message. Okay. Okay, so we're going to be moving to our action items. And the first one is not related to any of the testimony, but it's something that we need to do to move forward with our work. When we had our resolution adopted on July 18th, we authorized Board Member Dwight Takeno to represent the board in midterm bargaining with HGEA. Since then, a conflict arose that prevents Board Member Takeno from continuing as the board's representative. So the board must authorize another board member to represent the board in midterm bargaining with HGEA. I recommend that the board authorize board member Margaret Cox to represent the Board of Education in midterm bargaining with the Hawaii Government Employees Association and to identify and negotiate any changes, exemptions, or modifications to the current Unit 6 collective bargaining agreement as deemed necessary to meet the policies, directives, and objectives of the board's July 18, 2020 reopening resolution. Before we start discussing this agenda, I'll remind board members again to raise your hands in Webex and wait for me to call on you. So before we can discuss, I would like to have a motion. Excuse me, I need to get rid of this. I have to be able to see my board members here. So if someone could move and second so that we can move forward with discussion on this motion, I am looking for a hand to make the motion. Board member Lynn Fallon.
Thank you, Chair Cox. I move that we authorize Margaret Cox to represent the Board of Education in midterm negotiations with the Hawaii Government Employees Association.
Okay, thank you. And we have a second from board member Bakarse.
Right, board member Bakarse, second the motion.
Thank you. So is there any discussion on this item? I just see Lynn's hand. If you could put your hand down, Lynn, if you're finished speaking. I don't see any other hands. So if not, we will take a vote. I do need to do the roll call. So unmute yourself when you vote and please mute yourself afterwards. Board Vice Chair Uemura?
Yes.
Board Member Asher?
Yes.
Board Member Bakarse?
Aye.
Board Member Cox?
Aye.
Board Member Fallon?
Aye.
Board Member Nama'u?
Aye.
Board Member Takeno?
Aye.
And Board Member Voss?
Aye.
Okay, the motion has been approved and we will now move on to B. This is action on directives regarding telework availability for teachers. My memorandum describing my proposal is included in the meeting materials. I am proposing that the board adopt directives relating to telework because it does not appear that the department has been implementing telework in alignment with the board's June 18th reopening resolution. Specifically, I recommend that the board adopt the directives on page 8 and 9 of the memorandum regarding telework for teachers and direct the superintendent to incorporate them into the instructions provided to schools regarding telework for 2020-2021 school year. Before we start discussing the agenda, again, would like to remind board members to raise your hands and then take them down after you've spoken. Before we can discuss this, I need to have a motion to approve and a second. Board Member Takeno?
I move to adopt the following directives regarding telework for teachers and direct the superintendent to incorporate them into instructions provided to schools regarding telework for the 2020-2021 school year.
Okay, may I have a second? Board Member Bakarse?
Second the motion.
Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. Again, as we discuss this, if you would like to recommend any amendments, that can be done. But yes, go ahead.
Board Chair, this is Board Member Dwight Takeno. Can I expand on my motion?
So you want to make an, yeah.
I didn't state my motion fully, so I apologize.
Okay. So Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just going to restate my motion from the beginning. I move to adopt the following directives regarding telework for teachers and direct the superintendent to incorporate them into instructions provided to schools regarding telework for the 2020-2021 school year. Number one, in accordance with lines 240 to 243 and 268 to 273 of the reopening resolution, the department should ensure there is a comprehensive and thoughtful system of support for teachers, particularly during distance or hybrid learning modes. Number two, that administrators will approve teachers that request telework during distance or hybrid learning modes if the following criteria is met. A, the teacher has a location at home where the teacher can work or conduct instruction online with minimal disruptions during school hours. B, the teacher has reliable internet connectivity that is adequate for the instruction being provided and to engage with their administrator and others. C, the teacher provides a written commitment that their administrator will be able to, number one, monitor the teacher's instruction and or instructional material provided to students, and two, will be able to easily make contact with, communicate with, and get timely responses from the teacher. And finally, number three, the department can subsequently terminate a telework agreement if any of the telework approval criteria are not met consistently during the term of the agreement, or if the administrator determines that the teacher's instructions or instructional material is not effective based on the administrator's monitoring, and that the teacher's instruction or instructional material does not improve after the administrator provides guidance and training opportunities. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Takeno. Let's have a second again. Board Member Bakarse? Yeah, call on you again to make the second.
Aye, second.
Okay, so we now have the full motion and the second, and we will now have discussion. And I see Dwight's hand is still up, so maybe you can start us off.
Oh. Sorry, I didn't take my hand down, but I'll just start. Board Member Takeno here. I guess I just want to make a statement at first. I just want to commend Chair Payne for her leadership in putting forward action items B and C, and for the board's consideration and hopefully adoption today. I guess for the past several months, we listened to hundreds of verbal testimonies and read through thousands of pages of written requests asking to be heard. We have patiently waited. We also have made multiple requests and offered many suggestions. Unfortunately, I believe our patience has worn thin. These action items and the proposed criteria are exactly what I personally have been expecting would be forthcoming from the department. And I'm pleased that we've now finally have an opportunity to have meaningful discussions and deliberations on these very important matters. I thank our chair for taking the initiative of developing a proposed set of guidelines and direction that employees, school leaders, students, parents, and community stakeholders were in dire need of, and what appeared for so long to have been purposely ignored. These hard and difficult discussions couldn't have come sooner, but needs to be addressed and vetted. So with that, thank you, Chair, and I yield the floor.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Board Member Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Board Member Cox here. The first thing I want to say is I'm a little uneasy about all of this, as it's more or less that we're directing operations versus doing policy, which is what the board is supposed to do. So I'm uneasy about what it is we're talking about today. So I'll listen to what others have to say, because I actually have a couple of amendments that I think would help clarify if we continue going in this direction. So I'll yield at this time.
Okay, we have Board Member Bakarse followed by Board Member Voss.
Aloha, Chair Payne, Board Member Kaimana Bakarsi. First off, I'd like to echo the thoughts of both of our board members that testified previously, or that spoke previously, that yes, really do commend Board Chair for taking this action. Much needed. We need to move forward, while at the same time sharing the concerns that Board Member Cox has shared as well. I think this is a great start, and there's a lot of work that we have to put into this before considering it. You know, I've had the chance to speak with various teachers and administrators, principals, CASAs, and you know, it really is unfortunate that it is not being applied. Telework is not being applied consistently across the board. But I have heard some great stories from all sides of how it worked really well and how it can work really well. One of my worries, and I'll just leave it at one for now, is as we're considering this action, how will this affect being able to move from full distance to hybrid, and then from hybrid to in-person instruction when we need to do that? I fully agree that if we're in full distance learning, that teleworking should be made widely available. But you know, speaking to different administrators and hearing their plans for phased introduction of face-to-face learning or hybrid and then face-to-face, we will need teachers to be in the classroom at certain times. So how do we be really equitable about allowing telework during full distance, but being able to recall them when needed as we're moving forward towards hybrid or towards face-to-face instruction when it is safe to do so. So, you know, that was one of the concerns that I heard and that I had as well before hearing them. And, you know, I think that we would also need to add something in, and not quite ready to make a amendment yet. I want to hear what everyone else says, but something that adds that the department can also subsequently terminate telework agreements in order to move forward plans and not just written plans for transitioning from full distance to hybrid or hybrid to in-person instruction, and that we consider that as well, so that we can move forward in a positive way. Mahalo. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Board Member Bakarse. Board Member Voss.
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo Maggie's concern, which is my primary one, and I do agree with Carmana that we need to add that point, but let me just state my major concern. I appreciate the intent of the proposed motion, but as drafted, this is not something the board should adopt. It's simply not the board's role to say principals must grant telework requests based on criteria dictated by the board. That decision, like every personal decision at the school level, must ultimately be made in the discretion of the principal based on all the circumstances, including particularly the specific needs of the school and students. And that point was very well said in the written testimony of the principals from Hokulani, New Valley, Royal, and the Big Island schools. And I really want to thank those principals for their willingness to speak up. I do have some amendments that I would like to suggest potentially to address these, and I want to focus on number 2, where it says administrators will approve teachers that request telework. I would respectfully suggest that that be changed to say that administrators should consider the following factors in evaluating requests by teachers for telework. That would provide the guidance to principals that is of concern, that leaves the decision, the personal decision, in the hands of the principals where it must be. And I also agree with Carmana that there needs to be an additional paragraph stating that these can be terminated, these agreements can be terminated if and when the school transitions to full in-person learning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Voss. I just, because I'm taking notes here on potential amendments, I think we'll continue the discussion, but I want to make sure that I got down what you were saying. On the recommendation number 2, instead of administrators will approve, you want to say should consider the approval.
Well, I'm sorry, Chair. I spoke too. I said it too fast. That's why. And I apologize for that.
Just let me get it correct.
One of my bad habits. That's okay. What I was suggesting was that rather than it saying administrators will approve teachers, the following criteria are met, it say something to the effect of administrators should consider the following factors in evaluating requests by teachers to telework. And then obviously leaving those 3 factors in there.
Okay.
So the material language is should consider the following factors. And again, the difference is that rather than being a mandatory directive by the board, which we should not be doing as a board, it leaves the discretion in the hands of the principals, but provides them the guidance that I think you appropriately say they should have. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so what I have is administrators should consider the following factors when teachers request telework. And then
That's fine, Chair, yes.
yeah, we can wordsmith it, but I just wanted to make sure I captured that. Did you have anything else that you wanted to comment on?
No, I apologize. My hand is still up. No, I do want to hear Kaimana's proposed amendment because I also believe that's important, but I'll wait to hear.
And I think Board Member Cox also has some. Okay. So, okay, I'm looking for a hand. Board Member Cox and then Board Member Bacarse.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to listen to Bacarse first. One of the things in discussing with our complex area superintendent is that we've had 1 quarter almost of distance learning, and this is something that's been fairly new, and so people have been learning as they're going. So one of the things that was suggested is that I'm on page 9 after B, teacher has reliable internet connectivity, that blah, 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 and to engage with their administrators and others. The teacher and administrator mutually agree that the teacher has demonstrated the ability to prove effective instruction during distance learning. Because they're not going to be able to have the type of resources and the type of training. And if there are any teachers like me that aren't necessarily really tech savvy, and if they're on their own, that may be a problem. And if they've had a lot of problems during this 1st quarter, that may be something that they need to be looking at. So that would be the first thing that I would put in. And the second would be after C, that telework during hybrid learning mode only applies to the distance learning portion of hybrid learning. So that means that when it goes back to face-to-face, the telework is not there unless there happens to be some sickness or something that would fall under the contract. And so that would take care of, because there's no way that if we start moving into hybrid, into a face-to-face situation, and you have 60% of your teachers doing telework, you can't move back. So telework, in other words, is going to be happening during distance learning and not during the hybrid time. So do you want me to repeat what I said?
I've been writing here furiously, so let me just...
Okay, I'll say it again. Telework during hybrid learning mode only applies to the distance learning portion of hybrid learning.
So that sounds to me like that would be like after 3, because we talk about terminating and then think at a 4. The other one sounded like it was more criteria, so I stuck it up. So it would be like a D. We have A, B, C, and it sounds like you're doing another criteria that the teacher and administrator mutually agree that the person is demonstrated the ability to provide effective instruction on their own.
Okay, so let me repeat because I don't think I said it all.
Okay.
Ability, the teacher and administrator mutually agree that the teacher has demonstrated the ability to prove effective instruction during distance learning and can do so in a sufficiently self-directed manner.
Okay. Board members, and I see, Kaimana, your hand is up. Come on, Board Member Bakarsi. I just want to get some clarification and thinking of through this. Do you think that these two additional clarification amendments address the concern about that principals are having? I know one of the things that we heard in the testimony is that principals are deferring to CASs. They're not really making the decisions themselves. This does bring it back to the school level for the school administrator to make that decision in collaboration with the teacher. So I think it's important that we make sure that whatever we say is supporting that. And with that, we'll move on to Kaimana Bakarse.
Wait.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Board Member
The
Cox.
statement you made is not necessarily true in every case, because I can tell you on Kauai, the principals and the CAS are working together. And so just to say that principals are having no say and that the CASs are doing it all, I can't agree. It may happen in some places, but I don't necessarily think it's so. So I want to be careful in how we're phrasing some of the things that we're talking about. Because I think there are many instances in which teachers and principals and then principals and the CASs are working well, trying to do everything that they can think of to be successful in this crazy time. Thank you.
Yes, Maggie, I wasn't trying to say that that wasn't happening, but the fact that we have so much testimony about the unevenness of how this is applied is a message, I think, that we don't have consistency across the state. And so I'm not taking away at all from where it's working and where good collaboration is occurring. Board Member Bakarse?
Mahalo, Chair Payne. Board Member Kaimana Bakarsi. So I'd just like to offer up two mana'o. And the first is a friendly amendment to Bruce's amendment to add on to the end, and will communicate in writing the reason for approval or denial of telework. I think I heard a lot of people saying that they didn't have any clear reason or nothing really to point back at as to why they were denied. Just that they were denied. I think this would help to clear some of that up and open up lines of communication a little better. So that was the first one, and that's a friendly amendment. So I believe it would have to have Board Member Voss agree to it if we add that on. And then the second would be, and the department can also subsequently terminate telework agreements in order to move forward documented plans for transitioning from full distance to hybrid or hybrid to in-person instruction. This will give them the needed lead up time to transition, because as we all know, it's not where you leave distance learning on Friday and Monday morning you start up with blended. It's a lot of administrators I've talked to have a phased in approach over time, and they need that latitude to be able to bring back needed staff in a phased way. So I think that could be an amendment that would help work. Now, however, we may have to adjust that if we adopt Board Member Cox's amendment, which would say that it would be only for full distance learning and not hybrid or hybrid instruction. I yield the floor.
Okay, Board Member Takeno?
Thank you, Board Chair. This is Board Member Dwight Takeno. I would just like to make a statement in redressing my colleagues, Board Member Bruce Voss and Board Member Maggie Cox. I agree that, as a board, we should be making policies, but I think we've been waiting for some revisions to what we believe would have been forthcoming based off all the testimonies we've been hearing from. And basically, there are inconsistencies, and there is some confusion and lack of transparency in the way telework has been reviewed and approved or denied. And I think that's the intent, I think, of what I'm trying to come from, where we provide enough guidance and direction so that when decisions are made, it does not vary in a situation where if we could look and everything is deemed equal, we have different decisions being made. I think that's where the concern is coming from, because while I understand each school is unique, I think there are some situations that could be common enough where the situation will look exactly identical. And one has been approved and one has been denied. So expanding on the reasons, like what Board Member Carmona Barcarce has provided, would maybe help alleviate those type of concerns. But again, I'm just trying to look for some sort of consistency and transparency in these approvals and disapprovals. And with that comment, I yield the floor.
Member Barcarce? I see your hand up. And
I
Board
apologize, Chair. I forgot to put my hand down.
Okay, Board Member Cox?
Thank you, Chair. I didn't get what Board Member Barcarce said, but if that'll take the place of what I was trying to get done, that'd be okay with me.
We haven't actually officially got any amendments yet, so this is still discussion. And so once there is consensus about what additional language we want to put in here, then we can formally put these amendments into our vote. I want to make sure, that's why I want to make sure I get capture your language to the best extent possible. Let's see. So what I'm hearing was, remember, Board Member Cox said that the board's directives, we added a number 4, board's directives regarding telework during hybrid learning mode only apply to distance learning portion of hybrid learning. And then Board Member Barcarce, you wanted to have some clarification that sort of expanded on that or replaced that?
Correct. It wouldn't replace it, but it would actually expand that the department would be able to terminate the telework agreements in order to move forward transition plans. Basically, excuse me?
I was going to say, do you want to put that in additional language in number 3, or do you want to expand on Board Member Cox's number 4?
I believe that that could be a separate. That could be a number 4 or number 5.
Okay, let's make it a number 5, and then it's a little bit clearer. If we separate it out. So give me your language again on your.
Okay. The department can also subsequently terminate telework agreements in order to move forward documented plans for transitioning from full distance to hybrid or hybrid to in-person instruction.
Give me a second here.
Sorry about that, Chair. I spoke a little fast. I can read it again.
The department can also terminate telework agreements to facilitate the transition. Is that what you said?
In order to move forward documented plans for transitioning from full distance to hybrid or hybrid to in-person instructions. It seems that as it stands, the only way to terminate a telework agreement is you either have to go to full in-person face-to-face or what number 3 says. So this gives another ability for our administrators to move forward transition between phases.
So let me read back to you. The department can also terminate telework agreements in order to move forward with transitions from full distance learning to hybrid learning.
Correct. Or hybrid to in-person instruction.
Or
Mhm.
hybrid to in-person.
And
Okay, I think I got that.
and also, I added in documented plans for transitioning, just so that it's clear to everyone where we are in transition and why we're recalling, why we're ending telework for some.
Okay, so I'm going to read it back. The department can also terminate telework agreements in order to move forward with documented plans for transitioning from full distance learning to hybrid learning, or from hybrid to in-person instruction. Hybrid learning to in-person instruction.
All right, Polole. Yep, correct. Thank you.
Mahalo. So we got that. So that's actually an additional item which does not remove Board Member Cox's number 4, unless Board Member Cox does. Yours was the board directives regarding telework during hybrid learning mode only apply to distance learning portion of hybrid learning. So that is a little bit different. So do you want to keep that in there?
Cox here. I just want to make sure that once you start, maybe what Kamana has done will take the place of that. You think so?
We have comment from Board Member Voss, so I'm going to go ahead and let him speak. Go ahead, Board Member Voss.
I think, Chair, your comment was correct, but they actually address 2 separate things. Maggie's amendment, clarifies that the telework applies only during the distance learning portion of hybrid, whereas Kaimana's essentially gives the discretion to the school to terminate all telework agreements as they move to hybrid if that's deemed necessary in the best interest of that particular school. So I think, frankly, they're both important, and I welcome all the amendments, including Kaimana's written notification one. I think they're all important to provide both guidance and flexibility to the principals.
Okay. Hang on. Are there any other comments about this? And I would also like to say, I see Vice Chair Uemura's hand is up, but I just want to remind you that we do have a Deputy Superintendent, Phyllis Unibasami, here. And if you have questions that you would like clarification or comments that you would like to make to address her, we have her, and we have Assistant Superintendent Cindy Covell, who also might be involved in some of these decisions at the state level. So Board Vice Chair Uemura, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair Payne. Board Vice Chair Uemura. I sort of am sitting on the fence on this one because I, like a lot of the board members, I presume, are waiting to hear what some of the comments were. And where some of my thoughts are is that I am not 100% comfortable that the board should be doing what we're doing. In other words, is the board, by issuing directive, is that within the responsibility of the board? And I think Maggie and Member Cox and Member Voss brought that up. In the form of a, and I was saying, it's not that the department didn't follow some of the reopening resolution. So the question is this the proper form in which we are to engage that? if we find out that, if we know that they're not following the resolution, wouldn't the proper action be to engage the department and ask them questions as regarding why they're not following the resolution and what are some of the things we need to correct that? So in that vein, I really would like to ask Deputy Superintendent Basami to weigh in on this, to tell us what she thinks about our concerns and our recommendations. So with that, Chair, I'm going to just yield the floor and see if we can get Deputy Superintendent to weigh in.
Okay, Deputy Superintendent Unibasame, feel free to share anything you'd like to.
So aloha everyone. Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair and board members. I appreciate the discussion and been listening to it. I do want to say that I do support the amendments that were made and in the discussion with the board, within the board. A couple of things is that issuing telework is incredibly challenging decision to be made, and it really is. It requires situational awareness. We are looking at a time when we know that our children are diverse learners, and trying to figure out how we best meet their needs in such a time as this requires knowledge, not only about the learners we serve, but about the capacity of our employees to be able to deliver our best work and support to those students. So when we take a look at that as the first premise of under what conditions are we serving our learners, then it becomes a question about how then are we supporting our employees in being able to deliver that. And I think that's the premise of this whole discussion. And so when we look at a situation such as telework, it comes back to this idea of, and I think in the recommendation is that what might be missing in this is this idea of how is telework going to continue to provide the best quality that we can deliver at this time to our students. When we talk about special ed students who do not do well, or any other student that does not do well distance learning, have we created a mandate that does not take that into consideration? And I think that's my piece that I would add to this conversation. I find that the conversation that you're having is thoughtful and considering the dynamics of what our principals and CASs are facing. So I just want to say, please also think about our students and the impact of where students are best served. And back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis. I think those are well taken points. In this discussion that we're having, I know that the focus seems to be on teachers, but I don't think any of us ever take our eyes off the students that we're serving. The greatest concern that brought this forward, I think, is the inequities in the application. And so having that conversation at the school level with the teacher and the administrator, I think will help. I do believe that we need to put some guardrails around and to make sure that it's applied fairly. I noticed that I forgot in writing all this out, I didn't include a comment from Board Member Bakarse about written communication if telework is denied, so that the teacher does understand the reason for that, because we've had a lot of testimony that said they aren't communicated with about that. So part of it is really the importance of building trust and the relationships at the school level, and the sense that so many teachers are feeling that their personal situations are not important to the people that they work for. And that is a perception. I do believe that we all care for our teachers. They're our most important resource in doing the work that we do. But I do think it's really important for them to feel that they are being treated reasonably and fairly, no matter what complex they happen to be in. So I didn't include in writing this out, I don't have Board Member Bacarse's request that there be communication in writing for any denial of telework. So that is something we might want to put in, but I do have a draft that we can consider. But I'd like to hear from, we haven't heard from everybody, so please, Board Member Bacarse, your hand is up.
Mahalo, Chair Payne. I can provide you with that wording. It was a friendly amendment to Board Member Voss's proposed amendment, and it was just adding on to the end of it the phrase, "and will communicate in writing the reason for approval or denial of telework." I yield.
That needs to have Board Member Voss's acceptance because it was a friendly amendment to his. So I believe it would, that was number 5, I think. So let's see. The department can terminate telework agreements in order to move forward on documented, no, that's the, sorry. It would actually be an addition, I think, to number 3 on the termination. Or would it be someplace else? Board Member Voss and Board Member Bacarse, where would you?
It would have been in addition to Board Member Voss.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, Board Member Voss, do you see?
Thanks, Chair. This is Board Member Voss. I think it should actually be at the bottom of section 2, after Maggie's fourth addition D. That's where Kaimana's additional language should be, which in response to this question, I fully support the written documentation, Chair. And one thing real quickly as to Ken's point, which is very well taken, and I have even more significant concerns related to that as to the next agenda item. But this telework issue, like some of the other things we've talked about, we need to put this behind us. We need to get some agreement on it. And so under these unusual circumstances, I'm okay with it. I yield, Chair.
Okay, as you were talking though, I'm wondering if maybe that should simply be a number 6, because that would just make it stand out as a separate piece of this, where it says that the teacher will receive communication in writing for any reason, or for approval and for any reason if denied. Would that be a separate addition to that?
It would be acceptable in either place. And if you're more comfortable, Chair, highlighting it as a separate item, I guess I'm not sure if it would be 5 or 6, that would be acceptable to me, Chair.
Okay. Okay, any more, any further discussion here? I'm sorry, I have to scroll around to make sure I catch all the hands. I see a Board Member Takeno, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Payne. Board Member Dwight Takeno here. Now, I'd like to make a request to the department that they consider not viewing this only, as our discussion has been ongoing, available to teachers, but available to all DOE employees, because I believe there will be some employees in some particular classifications who could telework. and should be afforded the same equitable opportunities for it. With that, I yield the floor. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? A board member Voss?
Yeah, I apologize, Chair. I should have brought this up earlier. There's one in the motion, there's one typo actually that needs to be corrected. If you look on number 3, where it's talking about on the basis upon which it can be terminated, at least on my copy, it says the department can, whereas the number 2 refers to administrators. I believe that's just a typo. So I believe number 3 should say
Administrators.
Administrators can. I just want to correct that typo.
Okay, just for consistency across, okay, I've got that. And I've had some help from our wonderful staff, and the suggestion there is that instead of making a 6th item, that in number 2 for criteria, where we list the 4 criteria, administrators should consider the following factors when teachers request telework and will communicate in writing the reason for approval or denial for telework. And then the 4 criteria. Is that a little smoother?
That would be acceptable, Chair.
Okay, and Board Member Bakarse, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Oh, yes, Chair. Based on Board Member Bruce's last comment, I believe I used the term department as well. So for number 5, I believe it was. So that might want to be changed to administration as well. Can terminate telework agreements in that amendment. Mahalo.
Folks, would you like me to read the motion now? Or is there anybody else who would like to speak to the motion? I'm scrolling around. Let's see. Board Member Bakarse?
Sorry, Chair, I didn't put my hand down.
Okay, okay. I don't see any other hands. Oh, Board Member Cox, go right ahead.
The more we talk, the more uneasy I am about directing all of this, in that we had principals and CASs that provided testimony, and we don't always get them providing testimony. I don't want any of them to feel that we're trying to tell them how to do their job, because that's not what the board is supposed to do. If something isn't working right, the superintendent is supposed to take care of it, and we're doing it. So I'm just really uneasy about this whole process. So even though I put in amendments, I may be voting no on this whole thing. I yield.
Okay, Board Member Namao?
Mahalo, Chair. This is Board Member Kili Namau. I have heard all of my colleagues, and I really appreciate you folks because you really know how to make these things happen with all the amendments. So I just, and listening to Board Member Takeno as well, it just seemed with all the chaos that's been going on for the last several weeks, something needed to be done. There's been a lot of inconsistencies throughout the department, hearing the different kinds of testimonies. And I think it's a good thing that Board Chair has gone out of her way to start to make things happen. And I believe, our teachers need to be supported. If it's distance learning and teachers are doing what they can and are able to fulfill these commitments from home, then they should be able to have the opportunities to do that. It just seems to me that there are too many schools throughout the state that have not been addressing these issues equitably. So I think bringing this forward is appropriate. I also think that all these amendments and discussions that have been shared previously and just now are just strengthening this. And I think, Board Member Cox, we're not taking away the abilities of the management of these principles. I think we're strengthening it, and it's being much more clearer than we've ever had before, especially when we add amendments of having things in writing because it's necessary. People haven't been communicated to properly. So hopefully with these additional amendments that we have here, that we're going to make it clearer for people to be able to move forward. So teleworking is just one of our issues that we've had to deal with along the way. And we just need to make things happen and start moving things forward. So with the additional amendments, I'm looking forward to supporting this motion. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Board Member Nama'u. Board Member Asher.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to echo what Board Member Namahu said. I think that we've heard for the past meetings, we've heard testimonies coming from teachers, and also we got assurance and confirmation from CASA or that they allow flexibility. So I think having this is not really taking away responsibilities or taking away authority or directing. It is really setting a standard that will allow for principals or CASs to have guidelines, and it's not at discretion of this and that. There is a list that they go through, and if it's good, they can allow for a teacher that requested. So I think that it's just providing a systematic way of approaching this. And I really commend the chair for bringing this up because it keeps coming back. And having some type of standard way of approaching it and granting is actually doing it. To me, it's a win-win for the teacher and also for the schools, for the principals who are reviewing their requests. Thank you.
Okay, Board Member Voss.
I just want to address Maggie's point, which is a really important one, and for all of the principals that are listening on this call, and I know there are many of them, and I thank you for that and taking the time. What we're doing here is approving and directing factors to consider, but to be very clear, the decision is still the principal's, and the principal can approve or disapprove based on the instructional model, the needs of the school, the specific circumstances, the staffing. All we're saying is that you should consider these factors, which the chair has laid out, which are important. But again, the ultimate decision is in the discretion of the principal. Thank you, Chair.
Board Member Takeno.
I'd like to maybe move on and call for a vote on this matter.
Okay, before we do that, I think I need to read the revised motion and see if that covers everything. So if there are no objections, I'm going to do that now. Move to adopt the following directives regarding telework for teachers and direct the superintendent to incorporate them into instructions provided to schools regarding telework for 2020-2021 school year. In accordance with lines 240 to 243 and 268 to 273 of the reopening resolution, the department should ensure that there is a comprehensive, thoughtful system of support for teachers, particularly during distance or hybrid learning modes. Number 2, administrators should consider the following factors when teachers request telework and will communicate in writing the reasons for approval or denial for telework. A, the teacher has a location at home where the teacher can work or conduct instruction online with minimal disruptions during school hours. The teacher has reliable internet connectivity that is adequate for the instruction being provided and to engage with their administrator and others. The teacher provides a written commitment that their administrator will be able to monitor the teacher's instruction and/or instructional material provided to students, and will be able to easily make contact with, communicate with, and get timely responses from the teacher. And the addition today, the teacher and administrator mutually agree that the teacher has demonstrated the ability to provide effective instruction during distance learning and can do so in a sufficiently self-directed manner. Number 3, the department can subsequently, this is administrators, that's a correction. Administrators can subsequently terminate a telework agreement if any of the telework approval criteria are not met consistently during the term of the agreement, or if the administrator determines that the teacher's instruction or instructional material is not effective based on the administrator's monitoring, and that the teacher's instruction or instructional material does not improve after the administrator provides guidance and training opportunities. Number 4, telework during hybrid learning mode only applies to the distance learning portion of hybrid learning. And 5, the administrator can terminate a telework agreement in order to move forward on documented plans for transitioning from distance to hybrid learning and from hybrid to in-person learning. So that is what I have as the motion. And Kaimana Bakarse, go ahead, Kaimana.
Chair, I may have missed it. Was the portion included that talked about communicate in writing the reason for approval or denial? Was that read?
Yes, that was read. It's in number 2. Instead of making an additional one, I put it in where administrators should consider the following factors when teachers request telework and will communicate in writing the reason for approval or denial for telework.
Thank you, Chair. With that, I make the motion to adopt the directives as amended.
Okay, may I have a second? Board Member Asher?
I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'm going to call for the roll call vote. Vice Chair Uemura?
I approve.
Board Member Asher?
Aye.
Board Member Bakarse?
Aye.
Board Member Cox?
Nay.
Board Member Fallon?
Aye.
Board Member Nama'u?
Aye.
Board Member Takeno?
Aye.
And Board Member Voss?
Aye.
Okay, so we have approved the motion. There was 1 no vote and 7 yes votes. Okay, I'm going to call a 15-minute break. I think everybody's had a lot of intensity in this last discussion, and then we will take on the last action item for the day. So 15 minutes. Actually, we'll come back at 3:30. So reconvening at 3:30.
Aloha, I'm Corey Rosenlee, your HSTA president.
I am grateful and so honored to be a part of you.
Resuming our meeting, calling it back to order. We are now at item C. We have action on directives regarding the Department of Education's use of the Department of Health's guidance for schools, COVID-19, including the applicability of reopening thresholds and learning model parameters, criteria for transitioning between instructional delivery modes, decisions and notices of transitions, and suspensions of transitions to hybrid and in-person learning. My memorandum described my proposal and it's included in the meeting materials. On September 16th, 2020, the Department of Health released guidance for schools COVID-19. At the time I wrote my memorandum, I understood that the DOE had not yet incorporated the DOH guidance into its own guidance documents. I am proposing that the board direct the superintendent to incorporate into the applicable guidance documents the minimum thresholds and criteria for transitioning schools to hybrid or in-person learning, clear decision-making responsibilities for such transitions, and reasonable notifications to families and staff of impending transitions. I'm also proposing that the board suspend changes to instructional delivery modes for all schools until the superintendent incorporates these directives into the applicable guidance documents. Specifically, I recommend that the board adopt the directives on pages 14 through 16 of my memorandum regarding the DOE's use of DOH guidance and direct the superintendent to incorporate them into the reopening plan, the principal's handbook, the health and safety handbook, and as applicable, others for the 2021 school year. Before we start discussing this agenda item, I'd like to again remind board members, raise your hands and wait for me to call you. You're very good at that, but we still need to remember to take them down when you're finished. So I'm going to move. I want to just say that there's a lot of testimony that has come in regarding the non-alignment of Department of Health and CDC in the reopening of schools guidance that has been given. And I know HSTA has provided some information on that. I did hear a statement from Department of Health yesterday that was shared on the news that they are looking at the CDC guidance, and we might ask Phyllis later on to share that with us, to what extent that's being considered, because I think that there was some interest in considering that. So I'm not sure if any changes are contemplated, but that is being considered. I want us also to really pay attention beyond the number of cases in the readiness for schools to open, to really be thinking about the other kinds of issues that must be in place and be clearly documented that are happening before schools are bringing in more students. And we've had lots of testimony over the last couple of months dealing with behavior on campus, enforcement of mask wearing, and the basic sanitation kinds of things like hand washing, the cleaning supplies that are not available in all schools to the extent that are going to be needed once lots of students are coming. We heard about toilets in the testimony earlier today, which I'm not sure how we can address that fully, but I think we need to be mindful of it. We had a letter from Senator Schatz to the board, which you all saw, asking us to consider ventilation in classrooms, and is part of Department of Health criteria. So I think Department of Health has captured a lot of these criteria, but we need to have some really clear understanding that they're all in place. There's situations with PPE being available to teachers, and particularly to teachers who are working with special needs students where they can't practice 6 feet because they have to touch them, they have to do personal care, they have to lift them. And so a differentiation of PPE for those teachers and educational assistants too who are working in those classrooms is really, really critical. I think that these issues are just as important as the number of cases on the different islands that we are considering. So all of that is in here and a multitude of directives. So before we can talk about it, I would like to ask for someone to provide us with the motion, which is extensive. If you have it in front of you, it was also available online, but Board Vice Chair Uemura.
Thank you, Chair Payne. Board Vice Chair Uemura. I'd like to move to adopt the 13 positions listed in your memo on page 14 and 15 and the board's directives to the DOE on the use of the DOH guidance and direct the superintendent to incorporate them into the reopening plan, principal handbook, and health and safety handbook as applicable for the 2021 school year.
Thank you, Board Vice Chair. Board Member Takeno?
Thank you, Chair. Board Member Takeno here. I second the motion.
Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. We are now open to discussion. And I'm looking for my first hand. Board Member Fallon.
Thank you, Chair Payne, Board Member Fallon. I want to thank you for this outstanding document. It was very helpful to me, and I'm sure others, to begin to look at the various standards that have been set, the differences between them, and some of the areas of inconsistency and areas of concern. This is something that we would expect the department via the superintendent to continue to do as part of our expectations. So I would like to have the board consider adding language that makes it really clear, because changes will be coming forward, that our expectations are that going forward, that the superintendent and the DOE will be responsible for any subsequent iterations and changes, and that they will be incorporated into the documents you've identified as applicable. This is something that, we have spent many hours listening to in testimony because of some of the inconsistencies and the concerns that have come up as a result. So we need to do this going forward.
Okay, so you are suggesting that we add
language,
it's like right at the very beginning of the motion?
So it'd be moved to adopt the following positions, whatever we end up with, as the board's directives to the DOE on the use of the DOH guidance and its subsequent iterations.
Okay, I see, right there. And then it comes back to, and direct the superintendent to incorporate them into the reopening plan.
So when you think about roles and responsibilities, that would clearly be the responsibility of the superintendent and the department.
Okay. So we have that suggestion. There are a lot of different items here, 13 of them actually. Maybe while we're thinking about those, I see Margaret Cox. I'd like to also, Phyllis, you can begin thinking, because I would like to invite you to share any updates that you have from your recent meetings with Department of Health during the last week. But first we'll go to Board Member Cox.
Thank you, Chair. I have a real problem with number 12 because complexes were told to be working on their plans, and it just so happens that all of the elementary schools on Kauai have put it on their website on when they would start the hybrid model, and that not all of them are doing it exactly the same. Some are phasing it in a little differently. Some are starting off with K-6. So now you're going to say we're going to tell them they can't be doing this until there's some other something that comes out. When if you talk about parents being confused, because these schools have already sent out for parents to respond if they still want distance learning or if they're wanting their kids in school, and now we're going to go back and tell them all, oh, sorry, go change your website again and mess up how the parents are. So I can't agree that we're going to just all of a sudden say no school can do anything until such and such and such is done, because schools, and I'm sure that we're probably not the only complex that's already sent out information to parents and already made the plans. I just had an email from a principal in an elementary school saying that she had had her APC meeting and everything seems to be very thorough. They check to see if they have enough of their cleaning supplies and so on and so forth. So number 12 is a real problem. And especially you talk about saying we tell them to do one thing and then we change it and we tell them again. And now it's the board that's going to be telling them they can't do anything when they've already sent out all this information. I went to every single website and it's clearly there on the school what it is they're planning to do. And the complex area superintendent has been involved with all of this also. And so the schools are having the flexibility to do it. Like one is not going to start with 5th grade. One is only going to do K-2, so on and so forth. So I don't understand that we're just all of a sudden going to tell everybody to stop everything that they've been doing to wait for something more to come out when they've been told to go ahead and make these plans and make it available to their schools. So the schools know the starting dates, they know all of this. So I'm really unhappy with this. I yield.
Okay. Anybody else? I saw another hand up and now it's gone. Board Member Voss?
I share Maggie's concerns about this. Candidly, I'm very, very uncomfortable with this. This motion has 18 different directives to the department to include the subparts. It appears to rather clearly overstep the board's role and usurp management's role. And my question is going to be for Phyllis, and it's along the lines of what Maggie was saying. Deputy Superintendent, could any of these directives potentially delay the reopening of schools that have made plans and are ready to reopen this month for students in some form based on the Department of Health guidelines?
Go ahead, Phyllis.
Oh, thank you. I was waiting to be called on. So thank you, Board Member Fox. I'm a good student. So yes, the answer is yes. As I read the description of the recommendation and in conversation with schools, there are some issues that if adopted with the language as is, would create challenges for the schools and the models that they have planned. As an example, if you look at recommendation, I'm just going to take the easiest one, recommendation 3A, successfully implement and consistently enforce at least 6 feet physical distance between all individuals on campus at all times. And as you think about the models that we have set forth based on the board resolution, it was very clear from the very beginning that the board supported decisions that said to prioritize our vulnerable learners, especially those who were not successful in distance learning, virtual learning. And the schools across the state have built models that said that our students who are vulnerable to failure need to be considered in this work. What that means when we look at the social distancing, our medically fragile students who need medical care and are in our classrooms would not be able to meet that directive. Students who are in wheelchair and have others helping them, supporting them. Students who have other needs that may require closer distance than and touching and or some kind of tactile instruction would not be able to be served. And so the 6 feet for all individuals at all times poses a challenge to what we have already set up in our learning hubs and also with our specifically our students that have special needs. And so so the answer is yes. And I just wanted to give an example. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that because that's exactly what I was getting at. I mean, you looked in the testimony, complex area, Superintendent Mahoy talked about the plans to reopen in a phased way the Kaiser Kalani Farrington complex. Principal Ueda laid out her plans for my elementary phased starting on October 12th. And I want to direct you to one provision of these plans that I think could potentially cause delay. Do you have it in front of you, Phyllis?
Sorry, yes, I do.
Okay, so if you look at 13, it talks about the superintendent must request a rationale from the DOH and how it determined its learning model parameters, and then goes on in the end to say the superintendent must include this rationale in the reopening plan. If you go then up to number 12, it says no school may change its instructional delivery mode to hybrid or in-person learning until the superintendent incorporates the board's directives stated herein into the reopening plan, principal handbook, or health and safety handbook. As I read that, if the Department of Health has other priorities, is unable to timely get you a complete rationale for its learning model parameters, the department's not going to be able to do number 12, and therefore schools are going to be precluded from opening. So that's another one I think that could delay those schools that from the reopening. Besides the two that we mentioned, are there any other provisions that could potentially delay reopening for schools that have plans and will be permitted to do so under the Department of Health guidelines? And I yield after this, Chair.
Okay, Phyllis, and maybe Phyllis, you could talk a little bit about where the department is with the Department of Health. I know that we've been frustrated, and as you have, over rather slow response over time. And I think it's important to remember for board members and the department and anyone who's listening that when we set up our expectations, we did have expectations that Department of Health guidelines would be included in the criteria for reopening. And I know that we've moved forward with plans for reopening, but just based on testimony alone, it's clear that that's also very unevenly accomplished across our state. And I think that those are bigger concerns than maybe we're realizing if you're in a school that just doesn't have the safety precautions, and even simple things that I know principals are trying to monitor, but access to classrooms, multiple people in different classrooms, and cleaning is not occurring on a regular basis because we simply don't have custodians who are able to do that. There are a lot of concerns that people are sharing with us, and I think rather than just say, we're not going to pay attention to those guidelines because they're not in we don't have them yet incorporated. And there may be things that need to be changed. A Department of Health guidelines, they're giving us guidelines, but what is the department doing with that? And we haven't seen that yet. And there's still discussion at Department of Health. So go ahead, Phyllis, and you can talk to us about what's going on there.
Yeah, and so thank you, Chair. So there's two issues that you brought up, and I think just to make sure that I answer both. The first one is about the DOH metrics and thresholds, and then the second one has to do with the department's work around reopening schools and what might be seen as haphazard or not clear, to talk about the work that the leaders have been doing around this, and to show the way in which we're approaching this work and being thoughtful about it. So let me start off with the DOH, the concerns around the DOH guidance. There is a committee, and the best way I can describe it is we are concerned with what was placed into the DOH guidance document. And currently, I would say that our focused work is on the metrics and the thresholds in the document that was presented earlier this month. The committee is led by the Department of Health, and the participants invited by them include representatives from the private schools, the charter schools, public schools, as well as the other organizations serving children, including pediatricians. From the Department of Education, on that committee is myself, A.S. Armstrong, the administrator from School Health, a complex area superintendent, 2 principals, one from the neighbor island and one from Oahu, and two teachers. And we asked that they be invited to participate in order to lend their perspective to this. The recent DOH guidance contains a set of metrics per 10,000 as they monitor by county and by some cases islands. The department consistently is looking at the CDC, and with the addition of the recent DOH metrics, the 2 sets offer different ways to examine community spread. And at this time, as recently as last night, the committee members were sharing about how we see making decisions across the different types of schools. So really being able to hear from other entities about what are the variables in their decisions to reopen the school. And the variation after the discussion stems from, but are not limited to, some of the following, right? So number 1 is the types of students that are enrolled. There's a difference between a school with 500 high school students and another one with 3,000 students, and the types of students served. So whether it's grade level, some of the schools represented on the committee have screening and selection processes, so more homogeneous, and others, like ourselves, are more diversified, and we serve students from our surrounding community. The second one that I would just mention, I don't want to go through the whole list, but is the facility's capacity to adhere to social distancing. As you well know, some of our schools are much smaller than other schools, and their classrooms, depending on when they were designed, reflect the time period of the philosophy of education at that point in time. So some of our classrooms are much smaller than others that were built later. So we have still engaged with the Department of Health in the metrics, because when we actually applied real data to the metrics, we were able to show them that we come up with very different decisions about what the risk factor is. And that created a big conversation around it. So we, as the department, held off on, while we have incorporated much of what the Department of Health did put in, because we saw consistency across the many agencies talking about COVID impact on schools. We did embed it. We withheld the part about the metrics until we decided we would listen to what the board was discussion would be in order to say, okay, so how do we want to proceed? Personally, I do think that the CDC methodology is much when I look at when we place numbers in it and we look at what decisions were made in the past at certain times when the incident, and looking at the incidents at that time, I think CDC captures it a little bit better. Where CDC was silent and the Department of Health is trying to support our schools is taking a look at, so what are the thresholds for the types of learning models that can go forward. The models that they suggested are suggestions, not necessarily must-dos, right? They realize as they talk with us that depending on the types of students we're serving, the facilities, lots of different variables, that it makes it difficult to use one metric to make a determination about whether or not a school should be following a certain model. And so that's the Department of Health. We continue to have conversations with them, along with other schools, to get a sense of what is going to be the standard across any type of school in the state of Hawaii, versus what will we have to consider uniquely as the Department of Education. So that's sort of the update around the Department of Health. And I'm just wondering, should I stop and take questions, or if there's any clarification needed?
Yes, if
Now.
any board members have any further clarification needed or questions for Phyllis, I did hear her say that they are looking at the department or the CDC metrics and thresholds. I guess one of the things I would say that is still a concern for me is these are really important things to consider as we're opening schools in whatever plan that's being opened. Do we have any level of documentation that gives assurances that the concerns that are identified regarding the mitigation procedures, including PPE and cleaning supplies? I worry when I hear about bathrooms not being cleaned now when we have very few kids. They're not being cleaned adequately, or they don't have paper towels and they don't have soap. Those are small things, but those small things could lead to something much more serious down the road. So I feel like there needs to be assurance that those are in place before a school opens.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of my answer for the second question. And if you want me to answer that now, or I can do that as I talk about what the leaders have been talking about, and what we are putting together as our proposal for how to assure everyone.
Okay, before you do that, let me call on Dwight Takeno, board member Takeno, because he may ask something that you could incorporate into your answer on all of those topics. So go ahead, board member Takeno.
Thank you, Board Chair. Board Member Takano here. Assistant Superintendent Unibasami, what's the status of the department's request to get dedicated contact tracers from the Department of Health?
So we have made that multiple times, and we do have a written memo that we did send to Department of Health, and we absolutely can send that to you to show you that we have made a written request, but not only verbal but written. And as early as this, as recent as this morning, was in discussion with HIEMA, that also included A.S. Armstrong and Lindsay Chambers, talking to them about the needs of the public schools. Sorry, I'm going to get out my notes because I want to make sure I say this correctly. And requested again that we were asked if we were aware that there were contact tracers that were dedicated to the Department of Education, and we agreed that we had heard about it, but we had not met anyone. And then I made the request that because we have the COVID response team, when a school signals that there might be a confirmed case or a potential case on a school, this COVID team from the Department of Ed surrounds that school to support the principal, to make decisions and to lend extra support. What we asked for this morning again was that a DOH person be designated to jump on the phone or the conference call along with the Department of Education at the time that we are notified by the principal that there is a possible case or concern at a school. And so that was as recent as this morning with HAIMA. But we don't have a definitive, this is what's going to happen.
I think, and I appreciate the department making that request to the Department of Health, because I really thought that was a key component necessary to have structured and in place before we reopen schools, or now that we're considering reopening schools, because administrators aren't contact tracers, right? Principals and vice principals aren't contact tracers. And I'm getting feedback that that's what they're asked to do. Not part of their role, and it shouldn't be part of their responsibility because they're not adequately trained to do that. So, there are different things I think that need to be considered when you reopen schools. You got to give these principals and school level staff the reassurances that the resources, the supplies, and anything available to help them mitigate, spread, or if there is a potential positive, to contain it. And, I think that request came sometime in maybe late August, early September. I think it's important that before we start reopening, that we have some infrastructure ready to go, so I don't get this, messages about principals doing contact tracing. It's just, I don't think that they should be doing that. That's not part of their job. So I encourage you to work with the administration in seeing if we can secure that, or if there is extra COVID money that the governor has been issuing out to departments, that maybe we could get one or dedicate or hire someone to do it, or maybe a third party provider. But I would think that that structure needs to be in place. With that, I yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Takeno. And I want to state that we agree with you wholeheartedly. In our responses in numerous places, our written statement has been that HIDOE does not do contact tracing, as this is the responsibility of Department of Health. In the spirit of cooperation, principals organize information easily accessible at the school level. For example, contact information, including private providers for related services, attendance, dates of attendance, and school maps, and gather information from employees, parents, and visitors, and other stakeholders to notify them who have notified them that they have been diagnosed with COVID, to provide that preliminary information to DOH, because sometimes there's a delay between the primary care provider and getting it to DOH. And sometimes the fastest communication comes from the employee or the student's family themselves. And so we pass that information on to DOH in the hopes that that the quick actions of our school leaders in gathering this information, they believe will support the contact tracing done by DOH, will expedite resolution to protect his or her school community. And so while we are in the spirit of cooperation, giving access to information that will help DOH to mitigate the situation, we have never, ever agreed to being contact tracers and will not agree to it.
Okay, I see Board Member Fallon, your hand is up. Board Member Fallon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Payne. If I could, Chair Payne, I do have another question. Deputy Unabasami, if you look at the recommendations, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, And putting aside kind of the board's role versus the department's role, and I think the concerns raised by Board Member Voss and Board Member Cox about impact to decisions that may have already been made by representatives, administration members in the DOE. Are there any of the roles and responsibilities? Because I'm trying to get really clear as we move forward on what level and who is responsible for what by position. Are there any concerns or contradictions or discrepancies in those areas identified in the numbers that I provided that are problematic or are not what is currently in practice? And if so, what is currently in practice, or how might we clarify further?
So,
because
member,
it's a big
I just
impact.
want to, oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make sure I got the numbers 4, 5, 6, 9, and 11.
4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Because they all identify specific titles and positions in different levels of the department. And then it really is very helpful in looking at who's responsible for what.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. I do want to say that the statements that you highlighted, there are, so for most part, 4, 9, 10, 11 are consistent with our current practices, where and I'm going to start with number 5, where it says that principals seeking approval must demonstrate that the school can adequately implement COVID mitigation strategies. So I kind of want to go back, because I think we're going into the second part of the question that Chair Payne opened with. And the first part was about DOH metrics and the guidance document. And the second part had to do with reopening and the way the department is addressing, right? So I just want to say that since the summer months and into the first quarter, the DOE leadership has been in conversations about the different variables to consider about how to thoughtfully transition students back to school, the school facilities. And this includes face-to-face instruction that continues to be a careful and deliberate phase in identifying student groups in compliance with the CDC and now DOH guidance for vulnerable learners. We've always said the early elementary grade levels, especially our youngest learners, are going to probably have the most difficult time with virtual learning because their literacy skills are not at a level of being self-directed learners, our special ed, EL, and so forth, and students with specific needs. The second thing is that all the transitions that we've been talking about, we consistently have said is based on an evaluation of the operations, the personnel, and the facilities. And so while to others it may seem like it's haphazard, different decisions made in different parts, in different places, the reality is our schools are built differently. The way the operations are handled are different, and the personnel that staff that school are different. And so if we are talking about making sure that there is particular attention paid to the school community, to the needs of the students that they're serving, to the resources and the assets that are at the school, the best place for that decision to be made is at the school level. However, we also believe that there needs to be some operational guidance around how to make those decisions. So while the DOH guidance for reopening schools was released in September 2020, the work that we were doing in terms of coming to shared commitments about what are the assumptions that we're going to hold and what are the subsequent actions that we're going to take as a department across all of our schools statewide. And so we talked about, first of all, that there needed to be a transition phase design, because in the beginning we talked about really following the governor's recovery, the different phases. And right now we're in active care, and the next phase is recovery. What we saw as leaders in our discussion was that just moving from distance learning and moving completely to a hybrid and or to the school models that they expected to open up with in September or in August, sorry, in August, it seemed like we were missing a bridge in between, that we needed to really phase that in. And that's the term that we came up with. So the transition phase design has to be led by school and complex area leaders in collaboration with their school community members and the leaders in that area, meaning the community leaders, the partners that work with them are closely aligned with them and so forth, that there needed to be discussion about that. And each of the transition phase should include justification for, and I'm just going to name a few because there's a lot, but I'm just going to name some, is to remind people of the prioritization of students with vulnerabilities to learning. So of course, special ed, EL, early learning, early elementary. But we also talked about something that was highlighted in fourth quarter of last year, and that was the significant transition years. We know that right now our kindergarten enrollment is low, and there's probably reasons for that. Sixth grade is a transition, from elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school. These are times for our students when they're actually moving from one school facility to another, all of them, and we know that's a difficult transition in a normal school year. But in a year like COVID, how do you feel like you belong to a school community, a new school community? How do you know the teachers, and so forth? And then we also added our seniors, because any student a senior who starts to struggle with performance means that they might not be graduating on time. So we actually started to think about, maybe these are some of the other areas that we need to think about, and we've been talking about. We also started talking about how do we increase the number of students on campus, because one of the metrics said 50%, right? You can go up to 50%. But when we started to think about those numbers, especially in our large schools, 50% might come out to be 1,500 kids. And that would create, obviously, challenges. And so we started talking about why would there be challenges. So really determining what the impact would be on the workforce, the modifications that need to be made about facilities, and how we use it, and other mitigating factors, such as the school master calendar, the assignments, the rotation of in-person learning, and assurances that the school would be able to implement. And we've agreed that we would want to take the CDC health and safety mitigation strategies. There's 5 of them. And we said that these things must be in place. And that goes back to what Chair Payne was talking about, the masks, the consistent and correct use of masks, social distancing, hand hygiene, cleaning and disinfection, and contact tracing in collaboration with the local health department. When we talk about line 5, or recommendation 5, I underlined this phrase, must demonstrate. And so the conversation we had about what does it mean to demonstrate, when we had this conversation on Monday, was when we saw the board memo, we started talking about what does must demonstrate mean. It means, and to us, and we're offering this as our thinking, is that it's training of all staff and students around the mitigation strategies, that there's a cycle of review and reminders while school is in session. So monthly reminders, communications and so forth about these mitigation strategies, that there be in place a system for monitoring and reporting compliance to those mitigation strategies, and that there's an articulated set of corrective action measures that are in place should there be challenges to being able to meet those 5 mitigation strategies. We also talked about verification through documentation, because we know just not, that the tolerance for written documentation is really important, that there would be verification for that, there would be periodic reviews, and discussing how other methods of sharing can help us to forecast future decisions for the school and the communication efforts. We also talked about making sure that our decisions, with the assurances of what I just talked about, and the data on enrollment, the method for delivering instruction and attendance, and all of these things have to be factors that are used to determine what that transition phase design looks like. And so in the sentences the recommendations that you highlighted, Board Member Fallon, that's one of the pieces that we are working on right now. We have gone so far, but we decided to see what happened at this board meeting to determine whether our thinking was in line with what was going to be expected of us, before we finished all of our agreements on this.